up to me and I'll give you the key. It's easy. Just keep on hopping, keep on rocking, and don't start stopping. Everything you need, just to want to see. And if you want to make it better, you give it to me. I'll embrace it. I believe for you. You wouldn't believe what I see in you. So don't stop. Don't let the drip drop hop. Hold up and make it lovely, make it real, and make it yours. Don't stop.
All right, Dr. Parsley, I'm super excited to have you on here because you talk and work with a lot of people in the realm of sleep, which is like a really important thing. And some people don't realize it. We're kind of in this society where it's like, sleep when you're dead. You don't need sleep. You can pack more things into the day and sleep less. And we as a nation don't realize how important sleep is and how much it affects us when we do not have it. So today you and I are going to chat all things sleep.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. That's exactly my dogma. I like to spew it whenever I can. I very much appreciate the opportunity to stand on my soapbox with your audience. So thanks for having me, and let's get into it.
I'm excited about this. Well, first of all, I met you through a mutual friend, Rob Wolf, and he said, "Oh, you got to meet Kirk. He's awesome. You guys would totally hit it up. You're right off each other's alley. All these things. You're a Navy SEAL, and I'm thinking that this kind of may have what contributed into your interest in sleep. But can you tell my audience a little bit about your background and what got you interested into this stuff and what you're doing now?"
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it's just sort of the path of life, the way it goes. I never really had any interest in sleep specifically. I was as you said, I was a Navy SEAL. I was actually a high school dropout who joined the Navy, got a GED, and joined the Navy because I wanted to go do the toughest training in the world, and I went to SEAL training. And this is before anybody knew what SEALs were. It wasn't like, SEALs didn't have the celebrity status they do now. And I just wanted to go do this really tough training. And I honestly didn't even know they were going to pay me. I just thought like I was going to go, they're going to give me clothes and place to sleep and train. And I was either going to be killing people or training to kill people. And what do I need money for? And I totally naive kid. And I went to the SEAL teams and, of course, aged during that process and started dating a woman who would become my wife. And she was in physical therapy school getting her master's degree. And I had always been interested. Everything I'd ever read was around fitness and, and nutrition and like just to make myself a better athlete. I'd been a competitive athlete in every sport I could imagine to get into my whole life. And I love athleticism, but primarily strength and speed stuff. And so anyway, I thought, that maybe I could get out of the Navy and become a physical therapist, maybe that'd be realistic because, high school dropout, maybe, probably not going to do anything really big, I thought. And, I started working at San Diego Sports Medicine Center because you need 2,000 volunteer hours to even apply to PT school. So I started volunteering there. They hired me. I pretty quickly decided I didn't want to be a PT, but I worked in this mecca. I mean, we had podiatrists, we had massage therapists, we had acupuncturists, naturopaths, DOs, MDs, orthopedic surgeons. We had sports medicine, family practice, like you name it. Like we had everything there. And so I, when I was in college, I'm working there. I just had this great opportunity to talk to people and see what I really liked. And these doctors talked me into becoming a doctor, which I just thought was ridiculous. And then the doctor that owned the practice, he came out one day and he shamed me because the other doctors were saying, you should apply to here, this, we'll give you a letter of rec, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, y'all aren't listening. Like I didn't graduate high school. Like I'm not going to medical school. Like, set your, like, pump the brakes. Like, let's be realistic. And then the lead doctor comes out and he's like, hey, the question isn't, can you get in? The question is, would you go if you got in? And yeah, I couldn't really avoid that logic, and the shame flushed over me. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll try to go to medical school. So I get into medical school. I didn't even know that the military had their own medical school until I was applying for medical school. And I found out they had their own medical school. I was already married, already had kids, and they would pay me to go to medical school instead of the other way around. But yeah, let's do that. And I figured I would get back to the SEAL teams as their doctor, and I did. And I had this great background in sports medicine and orthopedics, and I was going to go there and like fix all the guys' shoulders and knees and elbows and all this stuff. And I got there at this really great time when they just got the funding. If you know anything about the military, it takes like 10 years to get the funding for anything. So they got the funding to build this clinic, a sports medicine facility, which would surprise most people. We'd never had one before. So, this is 2009. We're building our very first sports medicine facility ever. And they're like, hey, you have a background in this. You're the doctor. Like, why don't you supervise? Great. Perfect. So I do that. And so I supervise the build out of this, and I work with lots of other guys, and we hire the very first PT, the very first nutritionist, the very first strength and conditioning coach, the very first athletic trainer, the very first physical therapist. We bring orthopedic rounds through the clinic, we bring pain rounds through, we bring acupuncture through. And then I'm the dumbest guy there, because now I've brought in like all the best of the best all over the world. Now I'm just like, I'm nobody. I'm a guy who hasn't even finished training yet. And so what the military does when you're the dumbest guy is they put you in charge, right? And so they're like, well, you just supervise everybody. And if you or your audience know anything about the SEALs behave a lot like professional athletes in the respect that their job is who they are. That's what they do. And the worst thing you can do to them is put them on the bench. And so they just lie. When they go to medical and they talk to their doctors and whatever, they just lie. They do their physicals like, I'm great. Everything's fantastic. Like, they got duct tape over their bullet holes, and they're like, no, I'm fine. Like, nothing's, and they'll just they'll lie their butts off just so they can make sure that they're going to go to work. But they would come into my office, because I was in this rehab facility and I was the only guy who didn't really have a job. Like, I was just supervising people who knew more than I do. I don't know how you do that. And I'm like, all right, you guys are doing a great job. And so these guys would come to my office and they'd shut the door, and they trusted me because I was a SEAL. And I'd been a SEAL recently enough to where there were a lot of SEALs there that I'd been SEAL with, that I'd trained with, deployed with, and I had a decent reputation. And so people would come and talk to me. And they say, hey man, let me tell you what's really going on. And they list off all the stuff, like my body comp is like just totally shifting and suffering. I don't know what the hell's going on. My motivation sucks. I get up every morning around 4. I come into the gym. I work out for like 2 hours. I go to work. I feel really moody. I'm angry all the time. My sex drive is really low. Like, my concentration sucks. My memory sucks. And maybe I'm just getting old, doc. Maybe that's all it is, right? And I'd be like, yeah, you're 36. That's probably it. I mean, you're probably done, right? It's like just, and to be honest, I had no idea. I didn't have the first clue when the first guy came and told me. I'm like, nothing. I've got nothing, because I was a Western trained medical doctor. Like, I knew how to recognize and treat disease. They didn't have disease. They were performing way better than the average person in society, but they weren't performing to their metric. And so, about the 100th guy who came in my office, I'm dumb, but I'm slow, so it took me a while. About the 100th guy comes in my office, and he's like, hey, he's telling me his whole story. I'm asking, and really, like, after 10 guys came in, I could have told everybody else their story because it's so similar. But this guy comes in and he says something about taking Ambien, and I go, it seems like a lot of people take Ambien. So I put a little note in the margin. I just keep on with the interview. And then I go back and I look at all the other records. Every single guy who came in my office was taking Ambien. I thought, oh, maybe Ambien has something to do with it. Yeah, smart, right? So I go and I look, I'm like, but I don't really know. Like, I know how Ambien works. Like, I know the mechanism of action. I learned that in medical school, but I don't know enough about sleep to know if Ambien's really helping them sleep. I assume it is because it's been approved for that. But in my education to do that, I learned, oh, actually Ambien doesn't lead to sleep. It just leads to unconsciousness, and you feel like you're asleep and you look like you're asleep, so people think you're asleep, but all the benefits that come with sleep aren't really being achieved. And so maybe if we get these guys off of Ambien, and that was my sole goal, like, I'm just going to get guys off of Ambien and see what happens. So I get guys off of Ambien, and that's why I developed a sleep supplement, because I had to give them something. And I just came up with this concoction of 7 different things that they should take every night, and they're, to get them to sleep. And people started getting sleep, and lo and behold, their symptoms all started changing. Now, it wasn't 100% for 100% of the guys, but it was really powerful. And that was, like I said, that was really my only ambition. But then I just started learning more and more about sleep. And the more I learned, the more I was drinking my own Kool-Aid. And I was like, actually, this is actually the most important thing. And if you think about Occam's razor, just getting quality sleep could explain every single symptom they were having. I didn't think it would, but I thought it could, right? So that's something we should really work on. So that's really how I got into sleep. And the SEALs had no interest in sleep. I mean, you think about probably the 2 worst professions, right? Being a doctor and being, special forces, military, anything. They don't value sleep. These are the 2 professions I've been in. And, I really didn't think for a minute that it was going to be a really easy solution for them, or a really easy sell to them. So, but I did know the audience well enough to know that they care about performance. And so I tied it all to their hormones. Like, about growth hormone, about testosterone, about estrogen, about cortisol. Let's talk about how all this changes when you don't sleep well. That's how I motivated guys to sleep. And I really wanted to just fix their hormones, but military wouldn't let me do that. And it wouldn't have been the right thing to do anyway, but that would have been like the medical doctor way to do it. It's like, oh, this is low, this, give you more of this, take this away. And it ended up being great. I mean, I had 45-year-old guys getting PRs and, CrossFit and weight room and whatever, not just PRs for 45, but PR for their life, like for their entire lifetime. So, and these are guys who were broken a year before, 2 years before. So it definitely made a big difference. And, and the SEALs did these big retreats before and after deployments to kind of get the families together. And, I got pulled onto the stage because the Navy owned me. I was free. And then they brought in guys like Rob Wolf and John Wellborn and Cresser and, all these cats, and they paid them. But I shared the stage with all those guys, got to know all of those guys, and they got me on the podcast and stages around the country, around the world. And that's how I became the sleep guy, not really long. I swear that's the longest answer I'll give you, but that's just
no, it's super interesting.
Circuitous path. It's hard to shorten that whole lot.
Oh, I get it. I have a story that's pretty similar. Like, as far as length goes, I always go as a guest on podcasts, and they're like, so tell us what got you into what you do and all this. And I'm like, well, like, do you want like the whole version or like the sweetened condensed version? Because it's really hard to talk about this stuff and make it short.
Right. Yeah.
So I have oftentimes wondered though, like, especially with SEALs, they have,
at least I didn't start in 1970.
Yeah, exactly.
I could have started my story about 1970. Like, yeah.
Totally, yes. So like you can answer a lot of questions for me though, because I started hearing some of these symptoms that you're getting from some of these people. Mm-hmm. And I know that I've often wondered this, like, everything's kind of taken from a Western medicine approach. And I mean, even military medical, more than likely, I don't know how exactly it works, but that's my assumption I'm making. But the thing is, I've always seen these, like the special forces and how they perform and what they do and what their job involves. And a lot of it involves lack of sleep and lack of recovery. And so a lot of times I mean, I can only imagine that a lot of these people's adrenals are just totally roasted as well.
Yeah. And uh, that was actually my first postulate when I decided nothing I learned in medical school is going to help me here. I better look elsewhere. And I started looking in non-traditional integrated functional alternative medicine pathways. And the first thing I thought of was the first thing that kind of popped out as being an obvious solution was adrenal. Uh, you know, there, there's the phrase adrenal exhaustion, and there's an argument as to whether or not that's a thing or an accurate way to say it, an HPTA mismatch, whatever you call it. But we're sort of where the stress hormones matching what they should, and they weren't for sure, but they don't when you don't sleep well, also, right? So, I was giving people Myers cocktails. I was giving people adrenal support. The military is not cool with this. To answer your question, like not at all. Like I got in trouble. I was in trouble every week because I was going outside of my scope of practice. Apparently I wasn't qualified to give people IV vitamins like in a Myers cocktail, despite the fact I could do minor surgery on them. I don't know how anybody figured, how these rules were made, but there was, I started thinking back when these guys first started talking to me. The first thing I was thinking of was, you've heard about in every war, there's shell shock or battle fatigue, combat fatigue, like whatever they called this kind of syndrome that people are going through. And this happens in every war. And so when I saw the SEALs, like when these guys started coming to talk to me, they'd been in combat for eight or 9 years, right? So I thought, maybe that's it. Maybe that's all this is. And so I started looking at, well, what is that? And then, okay, adrenals, right? By and large, that's kind of what that combat fatigue syndrome was about. But of course, there's a ton of brain injury, which I didn't figure it out for a couple of years. But there's a lot of brain injury, a lot of blast injury for special forces guys. And this is stuff you don't notice because like nobody hit you, you didn't hit anything, you didn't get knocked unconscious, but the threshold for creating a minor TBI is 1.09 Gs. If you shoot a machine gun in a concrete room, it's 35 Gs every time you pull a bullet, every time you pull the trigger. And there's lots of other people in the room pulling their triggers too. And so like you're getting all these, like, what's that? What's the consequence of that? Our fast boats transit at 60 Gs, peak over 100 Gs. The Carl Gustav like anti-take, that's like 200 Gs for the firing guy, 300 Gs for the spotter. It's like, I don't have a guy who doesn't have brain injury. So, it's not clean, it's not cut and dry, but there's a little bit of all this stuff going on. I think that special forces in general, military in general, but special forces specifically, they select out for people who do well with overtraining, people who don't suffer as badly from sleep deprivation, and people who can keep going when they haven't truly recovered, and they're gonna, it's nothing to do, about grit or motivations. Like some people are genetically more capable of that, and age has a lot to do with it. Hormonal status, nutritional status, your upbringing, what you've actually done throughout your life, and then your genetics, and just can you do it or not. It doesn't make it the right thing to do, but that's how it's done.
It's interesting that you say this right now, actually, because I was recently taking a class, and I might totally butcher this. I am not done with the class, but I am taking a class. And they were actually talking about that, about how certain people handle lack of sleep and stress differently because their body is different pathways that their body uses, and how I think it was a study with the Navy SEALs. I could be wrong, but they were talking about how they started running their labs, and these people that functioned really optimally with lack of sleep and a lot of stress were people that had were able to maintain higher levels of DHEA, even though their cortisol was high. And so they were getting into kind of the nitty gritty of some of these things. And that's some of the stuff that I see when I work with people. Typically now I've kind of gotten myself this name for helping people that have done everything and not achieved the results they want, but they're doing everything based on what the fitness parameter is. And they think that if they work out more, they place more stress on their body, they sleep less, they're going to get better response, like a better result is what I was going to say. And it's just not the truth, because I end up looking at these people's labs and their hormones are driven down, their DHEA is driven down, like everything is totally messed up. But apparently the military has figured out how, according to this class I was taking, that to know that some people are special in that way, that their body actually is able to maintain the right hormones even though they're under stress.
Yeah, I mean, so there are, if we're talking about the same thing, there are 3 genetic markers for what they call super sleepers, and it's a misnomer. A lot of people think these people only need so much, like 5 hours or 6 hours or whatever it is, to be optimal. It's not true. So no one has ever shown that somebody can sleep 5 or 6 hours and be optimal. What they've shown is that there are people who can sleep 5 hours routinely and not suffer nearly as bad as other people who sleep 5 hours per night. To the best of my knowledge, and I'm always open. I always reserve the right to be wrong, but I've never read anything. No one's ever presented me with anything to the contrary. And I've been reading about this stuff for well over a decade now. There is no evidence that anybody is ideal with less than roughly 8 hours of sleep. But like their optimal performance level. But if you're, you have these super high performers that relegate themselves to 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night, and they do it over time. They really get accustomed to this, whatever pattern or lifestyle that they're on. And these people, told you, lots of bugs around here. Big old fire ant on my leg. These people can achieve amazing things, and then that's used as evidence that they didn't need to sleep. But what we don't know is how much more amazing would they have been if they actually slept. And all of the evidence suggests that they would have been better. Like, would they have actually achieved more? Would have changed their mood or their drive? Like, who knows exactly how their life would have turned out. But if you look at their physiology, their performance, we do something called sleep adaptation. So we adapt people to get rid of whatever sleep debt they have. The first studies with this were done, the bunker trials. They were done by William Dement. He's the grandfather of sleep medicine, and they put young, healthy college students in a cold, dark room for 14 hours a day with nothing but a bed and a toilet. That's it. No lights, and it was in a bunker, like a World War II bunker, which is why it's called the bunker trial. And they've redone this study hundreds of times across different cultures, different age groups. Doesn't matter. You pull people out of society and you say, I'm going to put you in this cold, dark room for 14 hours a day. I'm going to let you out. You're going to do whatever the hell you want to do for 10 hours a day and come back in for another 14 hours. And this is your life for whatever the length of this research is. What happens is everybody who comes in, almost everybody, 98% probably of people who come in, they'll come in and they'll sleep like 12 hours. 12 hours, 12 and a half hours. And these are people who routinely sleep 6 hours, a lot of them, and say they're feeling great and they're doing great. They have no complaints. And granted, a lot of the population who does this is young people, because that's who can afford to participate in research trials that pay you hardly anything, right? But they'll sleep for 12 and a half hours on average. And then over the course of 30, 45, 60 days, every single person goes from 12 and a half hours down to about 8 hours. That's where we get that number from. And then you can take those people out and you say, now you're sleep adapted. And now I can bring you out and I can test you on something that you already know, or I can teach you something, preferably, because then we get kind of two metrics, that your learning and your performance. I can teach you something, whatever it is you want to teach, like something athletic, something cognitive, problem solving, coordination, doesn't matter. Teach you something, test you on it, and then bring you back a few days and you get a baseline of like your performance and your learning and your skill level. And then I take away 2 hours of sleep and you sleep 6 hours instead of 8. And then you come in the next day and you test and you'll do worse. Of course, you'll do worse. And then if I ask you, how do you think you did? Just say, I did worse. I didn't feel that great. I didn't get enough sleep. I did worse. Okay. Next day, we do the same thing. Same thing happens. Next day, we do the same thing. Same thing happens. By the 4th day, though, I say, how do you think you did? You say, I think I did as well as I've ever done. I've totally adapted to this. And I feel great. I've only been sleeping 6 hours a night, but I know I feel great. I know I did as well as I've ever done. And there is actually documentation of them holding, like, here's your results. You're still going down. You're still getting worse. And they're arguing with the researchers, saying you got the data. And they're so convinced that they feel normal and they're doing well that they think the researchers are messing up. Because our self-awareness goes away when we're sleep deprived. So it's just like when you drink alcohol. You think, you have 1 drink, you're still pretty aware of yourself. You have 2 drinks, maybe things are slipping. You're like, maybe I should, hold off before I drive. You have a couple of, 3, 4 drinks. You're like, I can drive. Like, I feel totally fine. Because your own self-analysis goes away once you start interfering with your prefrontal cortex, which is the area that suffers the most from sleep deprivation. And just a little bit of sleep deprivation, it suffers. And you can feel your prefrontal cortex going away during the day, even when you're sleeping well, but you're just having a really, maybe you have a tough lifestyle in general, but maybe you're having a super stressful day. Maybe it's physically stressful. Maybe it's cognitively stressful, but you just notice, like, I'm not quite myself. Like, I'm not thinking quite as well. Like my decision making isn't there. Like my filter isn't quite there. My problem solving isn't quite there because your prefrontal cortex gets fatigued. It's the most fragile performance wise area of our brain. And it's the most important part. It's the part that makes us human. It's the part that allows us to be different than every other animal. It's the part that allows us to plan for the future. It's the part that allows us to simulate and go, oh, if I take this knife and I stab it in my hand, it's going to hurt, right? Like, it's not something I don't need to do it. I've never done it before. I don't need to do it. I know it's going to happen because of that. No other animal has that. Like, every other animal has to try that and go, oh, that didn't work. And so we lose that capability when we don't sleep enough. And so these people who think they're super sleepers, they're still suffering. They don't know how much, and we don't know how much unless we're studying and tracking that one person. But you're definitely not your best on less than 8 hours.
So let's talk about this a little bit. So with sleep debt, people don't realize that this accumulates over time.
Yeah.
And so maybe you can tell my listeners a little bit how that works and why sleep's so important. And then kind of we'll open up this rabbit hole with how this can stack up over time as well.
Yes. So really, the poorly palatable truth is that you're born into this contract and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just like being born into the fact that you're going to die. Nothing you can do. You're going to die. But you're born into this contract that you can be awake for 16 hours and you need 8 hours to recover. It's just the way it is. Like, that's the way this species is built. You can fight it. You can biohack it. You can do all sorts of tricks and think you're outperforming it. This body is hundreds of thousands of years old. It's been evolving for a long time. You aren't going to trick it. You aren't going to biohack it. It needs 8 hours to recover. And the entire point of me sleeping 8 hours tonight is to recover from everything I've done to myself today. Everything, right? Any type of fuel partitioning, nutritional storage is going away. Just toxic waste, like your cells. You should think of your cell as just, or you is just like a bigger version of cells, right? Like, you take nutrients and you waste, you produce waste products, right? Every cell in your body does the exact same thing. Those waste products would be the same as if you did those waste products in your house. If they had built up and you didn't have indoor plumbing, it would be a disgusting place to live. And your body's no different. You have to get rid of all these waste products and you have to replenish the nutrients. And And you have to do this in a systematic way. And the sleep is systematic. Like when you go to sleep, it's not the lights go off and the lights go on. There are hundreds of things going on while you're sleeping. And the first 20 minutes of sleep and the last 20 minutes of sleep don't look anything alike when you're studying people from sleep, right? So there are sleep cycles, and you go through these sleep cycles, and there's deep sleep and there's REM sleep, or non-REM sleep and REM sleep. There's all sorts of names for this. I can't keep up with the categorizations, but basically you have these slow wave sleep cycles where your brain waves are really slow, and your hormones, like all of your sex hormones, reproductive hormones, anabolic hormones, and your immune system are at its peak. So we know that most people know that fight or flight is maximum sympathetic tone, right? You have this autonomic nervous system. Think of it as automatic. It's doing things that you aren't thinking of. It's causing me to breathe. It's setting my heart rate. It's setting my blood pressure. Like it's making my kidneys function. Like all this stuff is happening. I'm not thinking about it. That's automatic. That's the autonomic nervous system. And there's a parasympathetic, which speeds it up. There's a parasympathetic, which slows it down. There's a sympathetic that speeds it up. Maximum sympathetic tone is fight or flight. Most people have heard of that. That's the maximum amount of stress hormones you can produce. You think about what you're like. Your pupils dilate, you take in more light, although you focus only on the threat, because it only matters if you get away from the threat. Like nothing else matters in that. Your bronchial trees dilate, you take in more air, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your stress hormones, cortisol goes up. That releases stored glucose and form glycogen, so you now have higher blood glucose. Your pain threshold increases, your reflexes get faster, your the blood supply to your skin actually goes away, so you can get nicked and cut and not bleed as much. There's all sorts of physiological changes, and you get faster and stronger. Your reflexes are better. You can see better, smell better, taste better, hear better, because there's a threat that's going to possibly kill you or cause serious harm, and all that matters is getting away from that. The exact opposite of that is deep sleep. So you could say, well, why don't I just run around and fight or flight all the time? I'd be super me, right? I'd be faster and stronger and like all this more capable. Well, no, there's lots of things that aren't happening, because if you don't get away from the tiger or the guy with the gun or whatever's causing the fight or flight, the car crash that you're in, if you don't get out of the situation, nothing else matters. Your body just takes all your resources from everywhere and says, we're going to make you fast and strong and enduring and like powerful to get out of this mess. And that's it. And like, we don't care what happens after that. Like, and we're going to put all the chips in for this. And so, you aren't fighting off infection, you aren't repairing, you aren't digesting, you aren't producing sex hormones, you aren't producing reproductive, pathways. Like, you're not doing any of those things, because it doesn't matter if you can fight off the infection. It doesn't matter if you can it doesn't matter if you can repair the damaged muscle or damaged tissue. It doesn't matter if you can mobilize different fuel sources. None of that doesn't matter if you can reproduce. All that matters is getting away from the threat. But when you're in deep sleep, it's exactly the opposite. You're physically completely incapable. But what's maximum? Maximum recovery, maximum sex hormones, maximum reproductive hormones, maximum immune function. You're fighting off parasites, bacteria, viruses, any type of infection. You're repairing your damaged tissues. You're getting stronger. You're actually taking the things that you learned during the day from short-term memory, putting them into long-term memory, and you're creating pathways that connect these things. You actually know that, and now you can compare it to other stuff that you know. So the point being of all this, and I'm glossing over a lot of stuff, but that's the basic gist. So like during this 8 hours, everything that you're trying to get better at, this is actually when you're getting better at it. Like you don't get stronger when you work out. You get weaker yourself when you work out. When you sleep and you recover to be stronger. And then the next day you can do more work. So the entire point of me sleeping tonight, using today as a template, these 16 hours today dictate what my body and brain are going to focus on when they're repairing tonight. And then tomorrow, hopefully I wake up more capable, or at least as capable as I was today, so that I can do the same thing again tomorrow. And I totally lost track of the question that you asked me, but I think
just why sleep debt matters, and you kind of got into that, but yeah.
Let me finish. That's perfect. So the only thing I have to say is that take everything I just said is exactly the lead up to what I was about to say was, if I don't sleep 8 hours tonight, if I sleep 6 hours or 4 hours, or I don't sleep at all, tomorrow still comes. I still have to do it. How do I do it? Do you know how I do it? I do it with stress hormones. I ramp up my stress hormones. I get closer to fight or flight. Stress hormones are catabolic, right? Testosterone, growth hormone, DHEA you're speaking to, pregnenolone, DHT, all these are anabolic hormones. These make me stronger. These make me more resilient. These take small things and they build big complex things out of it. So I take amino acids and I build muscles out of it. Catabolic, exactly the opposite. I use my muscles to get the amino acids that I need, and I break my muscles down. That's catabolic. So if I don't sleep enough, that's just one example. If I don't sleep enough, I'm going to compensate by releasing more stress hormones tomorrow, because stress hormones are catabolic and they're going to give me the fuel, much like fight or flight does, right? Fight or flight, maximum catabolic. We're dumping everything. We're throwing every fuel source we have to get out of this threat. So if I don't sleep enough tonight, if I sleep 4 hours instead of 8 hours, maybe I have 50% higher stress hormones, which maybe takes me 50% of the way to fight or flight. So like, I am just wearing my body out. Now, the worst thing about that is now I have high stress hormones. When I try to go to sleep, I can't go to sleep because I have high stress hormones. And I told you, the lowest stress hormones you'll ever have in your life is during deep sleep. It's the exact opposite of fight or flight. My stress hormones are too high to get to sleep, or even if I can just go to sleep from sheer exhaustion, they aren't low enough to get me into truly deep sleep. I don't repair and replenish and regenerate myself as well as I would have. And so even if I get 8 hours of sleep now, I maybe only recovered as much as if I got 6 hours of sleep, because I had such high stress hormones, which means what? Tomorrow, I have to release more stress hormones again. And then it's a self-propagating downward spiral. Like, I don't get good sleep because I have high stress hormones, and then I have high stress hormones because I don't get good sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love everything that you said right there, because a lot of people don't realize our whole body is run off of a circadian rhythm of some kind. There are big cycles, there are little cycles, and cortisol is what helps us wake up in the morning, and melatonin is what helps us go to bed at night. And when we are even in our life stress, if we're critically stressed out, then our sleep is going to suffer from that as well, because of those high cortisol levels.
Right. Absolutely. And as you alluded to, if you think about the cortisol curve, and it's almost a sinusoidal curve. There's a certain level that you kind of wake up with, and then it peaks throughout the day. So it peaks somewhere around 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's just gradually going up. And, coincidentally, this is where the majority of world records are set, like at this peak cortisol level. Because stress hormones, which include cortisol, they get a bad rap, and DHEA is technically a stress hormone. And they get a bad rap as being the negative thing, which is they're associated with this word stress, which we don't like the word stress. But stress in the scientific biologic sense is just, it's just simply resistance added to your body to cause, some pressure or growth on your part to get past this resistance. So when you wake up in the morning, if you're sleeping great, right? If you have a great lifestyle and sleep-wake cycle, and you just go to sleep roughly at the same time every night, and you wake up at the same time every morning without an alarm clock, what's waking you up is stress hormones, right? So they're going down in deep sleep. They're going to the lowest level they'll be at any 24-hour period, and you're getting maximal anabolic function. And then they're gradually creeping up over the night. And then they hit a point where that's high enough to wake you up. And no alarm clock, no light, nothing changes, no sound, and you'll just wake up, because your adrenals are and your cortisol levels, like, it's time to wake up. And then it goes up throughout the day, and then it has that little after lunch dip. Like, everybody has that. It doesn't matter if you eat or not. Like, you get that little dip, you get a little tired, peaks, and then it starts going back down. And at some point, it goes down lower than the level that it woke you up. Well, if you have high stress hormones all throughout your day, because you have a stressful life and you're jacked up on caffeine and like who knows what else, like you're getting yourself all ramped up. You have these high stress hormones. They never go down below the level that wakes you up. And now you're trying to go to sleep with more stress hormones than you wake up with. And that's what the postulate of the adrenal fatigue comes from. And whether it's actually the organs fatiguing, it doesn't matter. It's a mismatch of what should be happening. It's a mismatch of what your brain should be telling your adrenals, or what your brain is telling your adrenals and your adrenals are doing. And it's not matching your circadian rhythm. When I first started with these SEALs coming in my office, I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know I didn't even have a clue. So I just started testing everything I could test. It's just like shotgun, 98 lab markers, 17 vials of blood. They're just going in, like getting all these tests done. I had guys who came in with AM cortisol levels that were undetectable. Zero. They essentially came in with zero. I'm like, you should be dead. I don't know. Like, I don't know what to make out of this. But definitely overtraining, undertraining, oversleeping, and I don't want to get into that. Don't talk about oversleeping. People get undersleeping, overtraining, and undertraining all mess with your hormones or your stress hormones terribly. And something that's really unpopular with my private clients is I say, if you don't get a good night's sleep, and I mean, it's significantly bad. Like, it's not just like I slept 8 hours and I feel a little groggy. That's not what I'm talking about. But you slept 4 hours, or you slept 6 hours and it wasn't a great 6 hours even, and you were exhausted when you went to bed and you wake up exhausted, you shouldn't work out. Like, working out is counterproductive because you have to recover every night, right? You didn't recover. And like we were talking about earlier, you don't get stronger when you work out. When you work out, you actually damage tissues. You can actually rupture muscle cells completely. You kill those cells and you rupture them. But your body uses that template of what you're doing today when you get good rest, and it makes that muscle fiber better the next day for whatever you're doing. If it's endurance activity, it makes it more enduring. If it's strength, it makes it stronger, more resilient, thicker, and you're actually getting better when you're sleeping. So if you don't get enough sleep, you didn't get any better from your last workout. It's not the time to work out right now. Nobody likes that. And I differentiate that from activity, though. You should still be active, right? Everybody should be active every day, but you shouldn't be doing things that are making you feel really tired. And you definitely shouldn't be striving for performance if you're sleep deprived, because those two things don't go together. That's like racing your car when you're on empty. That's not the time to race your car.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with myself, for sure, if I do not sleep, I'm a 9-hour sleeper. I gotta sleep 9 hours or I don't function well. And I bring in a bunch of biomarkers and watch a lot of that stuff with my own performance and stuff. But I know that I need a quality, solid 9 hours of sleep to feel optimal. And if I don't get a good night's sleep, I do not train. Or if I'm getting to bed late, like for some reason or another, which is pretty rare for me these days, but I will literally shut off my alarm that says I'm going to train the next day, because if you are not recovering with sleep, you should not be out there training.
Right. And it's a hard pill to swallow. And I do it myself. Like, I don't want to pretend like I've got all this mastered. I know what to do. And sometimes I run a couple of businesses and I have a life and I have kids and, all that stuff. And sometimes I'm getting to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning instead of 10. And I'm like, I'm not working out tomorrow. And it's really hard to turn that alarm off. It's hard. It's like an ego crushing thing to turn that off, but it's the right thing to do.
So let's talk about a little bit. You talked a little bit about what happens when you sleep. But what are some of the things that can happen from lack of sleep? Like some of the red flags that we might have if, like, say we are starting to struggle with the inability to lose weight or things like that. What are some indications that we are sleeping poorly? Because I know there are a lot of people out there that are like, oh, my sleep is great. Then you start digging into it. You find out they wake up to go to the bathroom 3 or 4 times a night. There's like a lot of red flags. And I'm wondering if you can cover some of those with us.
Well, when I work with people on this. I don't really care what I try to be agnostic about what people really like. So I don't care if you're tech savvy or not. If you're tech savvy and you want to have all the sleep monitoring, all of the wearable stuff, you can do that. If you're not tech savvy at all, pen and a paper we can get away with, right? Like we can figure it out. The first, what I find is being not only the most important, but absolutely the imperative part of this whole process of getting people to sleep well is convincing people that they need sleep. Because as I discussed earlier, our self-awareness declines when we don't get enough sleep. So we think we're doing fine, and it's hard to convince people that they aren't doing fine. And I don't want to spend all my time trying to convince people that they aren't doing fine. One, it's a negative message, and two, it's a waste of my time, because like if your goals are more important to me than they are to you, then our relationship is skewed already. So the most important thing is to convince yourself that you need sleep. And so I tell people, unlike athletic training, unlike nutritional science, unlike all sorts of things in the health and wellness field, there's no controversy around sleep. If you look at this, the true data, so you're talking about like scientific studies, peer-reviewed studies on sleep, the data is the same. Like everybody agrees. Like there's no one out there saying you don't need to sleep, or you only need to sleep 4 hours a day and you're going to be like, that doesn't exist. There's no science around that. So all you have to do, and this is the worst sales pitch in the world, which is why I think sleep doesn't have the traction it should have, is because literally I can tie it to anything. It doesn't matter. You can tell me anything you value and I can tell you how sleep impacts that. And if you don't get enough sleep, you aren't as good at that as you want to be. Being a parent, being a CEO, being an athlete, it doesn't matter. Anything you want to do, sleep is imperative. Like it is the reason you're good at that or getting better at that. And so that's a terrible sales pitch. So I tell people, you just got to do this on your own. I just want you to go to a good source, go to like PubMed or Google Scholar or something and go sleep and whatever you care about. I don't care what you care about, like whatever, it doesn't matter to me. Basket weaving, probably, like you could do anything and there will be data to show you, oh yeah, we've studied this, and without sleep you aren't very good at this and you suffer pretty quickly from this. And so that's the most important thing. Now, to your point about how do you know if you're getting good sleep, that's the second hardest battle of my life, right? Because ideally, to get a great night of sleep, you don't have any recollection of sleeping, right? Because if you think about it, like what is sleep? Like I ask this at lectures all the time. Nobody can ever answer it. It's like, has anybody here slept before? Like I want to make sure I'm not asking an unqualified audience. Of course, everybody slept before, but nobody can define sleep. It's not a really easy thing to define because we don't actually experience sleep when it's good. When we're asleep, our senses essentially turn off, right? So we have this big neocortex of our brain. That's the part that people think of when they see the human brain with all the wrinkles in it. That's what makes us the smartest animal on the planet. And that's primarily how we interact with the world. So it has all of our sensory, it has our sight, our smell, and our taste, and our hearing, and our sense of touch and pain, and hot and cold. All that goes to the neocortex. And then it has all of our motor function, like how we go, like how we interact with the world. And when we're sleeping really well, that part's gone. That dissociates from that autonomic bit that's just running our body and repairing everything and doing everything automatically. And that dissociation is what dissociative drugs do. Things like Ambien and Lunesta, Valium and Xanax, and alcohol to some extent, GHB, like all these things, what they do is they dissociate the neocortex from the brainstem, and so it doesn't pay attention. But all being asleep really means is that there's a barrier between us and our perceived world, our environment that we usually interact in. And we can be awakened past that. And then there's like some, if we monitor your brain waves and your respiratory, like there's some predictable patterns in there. Like that's kind of all we can say about sleep. It's really kind of a lame definition. So, but when you go to bed, your eyes still work, your ears are still working, your nose, like everything's still working, right? Why can you turn on the lights and wake somebody up? Because their eyes are still working. You can make a noise and make them wake. Their ears are still working. You can put smoke in the room, they'll wake up. Probably their smell, like their sense of smell is still working. Like everything is still working. You can touch them, they'll feel it. Everything's still working, but you're just not paying attention to it. So your entire purpose of like doing everything to get yourself ready for sleep is to help that brain dissociate. So when we talk about blue light being in the sky, the sun goes down, blue light goes away, it stimulates some pathways in the back of our eyeballs, goes back to our brain, causes our pineal gland to secrete melatonin. Melatonin then is like the starter pistol to make all these changes in our brain so that our brain quits paying attention. That's all it is. We can overcome it by paying too much attention. We can go out, like if you've ever been super tired, you wake up in the morning, you're just exhausted. He's like, I'm gonna go to work, I'm gonna come home and go to sleep. And your friends talking, like going out to happy hour or whatever, and you're like, I'm fine, I'm great, I don't need to sleep whatsoever. And then you stay out till midnight, and then you, right? Because you can keep yourself awake past that. You can pay attention purposefully, even though your brain's trying to shut everything down. So I think I lost track of your question.
No, you answered it. I was asking why, part of why it was so important. And I think that, going back to, I would like to revisit the Ambien thing, because there are so many people that are stuck taking some kind of sleep aid, and right, they feel like they're trapped right there. Do you have any advice for people like that?
Yeah, so it's a bit self-serving, but that's, as I explained to you earlier, that's how I got into sleep. And the only reason I have the supplement that I have is because I couldn't just take away the SEALs Ambien and say suck it up, right? Like you got to give them something, and so I worked it out with them, like it was clinical trial, because they were coming back and giving me feedback, and we worked out the right ratios of everything to get them off of sleep drugs. But you have to have something like that. You have to be able to titrate off of them, because what happens with so when the pineal gland secretes melatonin, and that's the starter pistol that starts changing a bunch of things, hundreds of cascades change, all sorts of neurochemistry changes. And it leads to this neuropeptide called GABA, capital GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. And that does what I was talking about. That slows down the brain. It starts that dissociation, makes you quit paying so much attention to your environment. Well, when you're revved up all the time and you aren't like ready for sleep, it's really hard to not pay attention to your environment. So you lay awake and you think and you think and you think, and you hear things and you smell things and you feel things and you're uncomfortable. And so what the sleep drugs are is they work like GABA. They're GABA analogs, what we call them. So they're acting like GABA. And they're neuropeptides, so they have a receptor. So your cell, think of like your neurons they have like a little catcher's mitt, and then you have this GABA molecules, like the ball goes in the catcher's mitt, and then that gets pulled into the cell and it changes things, right? It makes some changes depending on what area of the brain you're in, does different things, but it changes things and it gets you ready for sleep. Well, if you can't fall asleep and you need to dissociate like that, the pharmaceutical industry is like, well, we can make stuff that acts like GABA, only better than GABA, right? And so that's what they do. And so the first thing were benzodiazepines, and those, when they bind, so like let's say I have this receptor and GABA binds and it pulls into the cell and it makes this change, and we'll say on a scale of 1 to 10 it makes a change of 1, like it doesn't matter what it is, it makes a change of 1. Well, you bring in a benzodiazepine that acts like GABA, but only better. It goes in, and on a scale of 1 to 10, it does 100. And then you bring in something like Lunesta or Ambien, these Z drugs, they act like GABA, bind that same receptor, go in, instead on a scale of 1 to 10, they do 1,000. So they cause this huge dissociation, but they don't do any of the normal stuff that's supposed to be happening when you go to sleep. So you don't actually go to sleep, you become dissociated. And this is why there's been a lot of really successful lawsuits against the pharmaceutical industries that produce Z drugs, because they dissociate your neocortex, which is your human appropriate, socially acceptable you brain, from the lizard brain, which is like, you know, fornicate with everything in sight, eat everything you can, like this lizard brain they talk about it, right? This monkey brain behavior. And so people are taking these Z drugs and they get in their car and they drive down to their, they drive down to the casino and they gamble their life savings away, they pick up a prostitute, or they go eat 12 pizzas or whatever, and they have zero memory of it. Just like you have zero memory of good sleep, because that dissociation happens. So when you look at somebody's sleep architecture, so when you first go to sleep, you have these sleep cycles. I talked about, alluded to this. So you have deep sleep and you have REM sleep. And so when you first go to sleep, throughout the entire night, every sleep cycle is somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes. And basically, that's going from being awake down to some level of deep sleep, back up to some REM sleep, back to essentially being awake. That's one sleep cycle. 90 to 120 minutes, you can figure out kind of roughly how many you would have of those every night. Well, when you take a Z drug, it will get rid of, let me back up. At the beginning of the night, it's about 80%. The first sleep cycle is about 80, 90% deep sleep, a little bit of REM. And then it changes each sleep cycle, gradually more REM, less deep. And by the morning, the last sleep cycle, you have 90% REM, a little bit of deep, 10% deep, right? So when you take a Z drug, it gets rid of 80% of REM sleep. Gone. You use alcohol, gets rid of about 80% of deep sleep. Gone. You do both of those, which is what the SEALs are doing. I do sleep studies on them, send them in to do sleep studies at the hospital. They come back 99% stage 2 sleep, which is neither deep nor REM sleep. It's what we call transitional sleep. So the sleep drugs don't make you sleep. They make you dissociated. They make you unconscious. The metaphor, the joke I always tell in my lectures is I get a guy to volunteer. I say, hey, come up here. If I hit this guy in the head with a baseball bat and he falls off the stage on the floor, who would say he fell asleep? Right? Nobody says that's asleep. He's unconscious. We know that's unconscious. You see somebody drink a bottle of whiskey and hit the floor. Did they fall asleep? No, they passed out. They're unconscious. That's what sleep drugs do.
So this is all really interesting to me, because then that leads me to think, so when people are taking these sleep drugs, how hard is it for them to break away from them? Because then your body, it's like the sugar, it almost seems like a sugar thing to me. Like once you eat a lot of sugar, you crave more sugar. Your body's just like used to that amount of sweetness. Is that a similar thing when it comes to, or it's that way with hormones and all sorts of other things like that?
And I apologize. I keep losing your question somehow. Maybe I need more sleep myself. So you did allude to that. So where I was going when I first was giving this metaphor of like these receptors grabbing onto different drugs. So the best metaphor I know, and it's still a little clumsy, I should figure out something better, but if you think about your body's a host of cells, and it can be your brain, it can be, but we're talking about the brain right now because we're talking about GABA. And so if you think about LA, just like a hugely populated, sprawling little neighborhood, like tons of little houses. And just think of every house as being a single cell in your body, right? And this is a single cell in your brain. And if the only way to get fuel and to get food into any one of these houses was a pizza delivery guy driving around just giving pizzas to the houses, like that was the only way to get fuel. So you can think about that as sort of blood glucose, like blood's flowing by, it has glucose in it or it doesn't. Well, you have this receptor for glucose, and you have this receptor for GABA, right? So if you can think of that as being like a doorbell in the house. So the pizza guy pushes the doorbell, you open the door, he throws in the pizza, everything's great. Now, if there was only one pizza guy in your whole neighborhood, how prominent would your doorbell be? You'd have thousands of doorbells all over your house, flashing lights, all sorts of things to attract the pizza guy, right? But conversely, if there were 100,000 pizza delivery guys in your neighborhood, you wouldn't want to be interrupted every millisecond, right? So you'd have like one doorbell hid under the porch where only one pizza guy knew how to get there. So that's what these receptors do. When there's a ton of what's called the substrate, in this instance, it would be GABA, or it could be glucose if we're talking about that. But the substrate is like what's binding to the receptor. When there's a ton of it around, your body's smart. It doesn't need to spend all this energy and protein making this receptor, because there's hundreds of thousands of these molecules around. So you start getting rid of the receptors. Now you have maybe 1/10 of the GABA receptors that you had. You take away your sleep drug and you produce a normal amount of GABA, because nothing's happened to make you produce more GABA. You're not taking this GABA analog anymore. And you only have 1/10 of the receptors. It's no different than if you were only producing 1/10 of the amount of GABA. So now you have inadequate GABA to go to sleep. And now you need something to go to sleep. You need something that acts like GABA. So you need to titrate off this stuff. You have to slowly come off these sleep drugs. If you've been on them more than like 6 weeks, you've downregulated your receptors, and it's going to be really hard to get off of the sleep drug. And so what I would do with people, and anyone listening, if they have a doctor who's giving them a sleep drug, I would have a compounding pharmacist make a serum that had, say, 10 milligrams of Ambien was 1 dropper full, right? It's 10 drops. And then they would do 10 drops for 3 or 4 days or a week, whatever, you do it however you want to. But 3 or 4 days is enough. But say 10 drops for a week, the next week you do 9 drops, the next week you do 8 drops, and you just titrate down so your receptors are growing back as you're doing this. And then I have them take all the supplements that they need to make sure that their brain and body is making everything that they can make, and giving them the best chance of recovering from that. And I got 100% guys off the sleep drugs who wanted to get off the sleep drugs. I don't know, I can't remember anybody saying that they weren't going to do it anymore and hopping off. But if they did, obviously I didn't get them off. But every single person who wanted to get off, we got off, just doing just that thing. But it takes a while. Like takes 6 to 8 weeks probably to get people off.
So I have another question that goes along with that. And that is that some people, like, you'll see in like the supplement stores, you'll see GABA for sale and stuff like that. And some people think that if they just take that, then they're going to be able to upregulate that sleep function. But I was actually doing some reading that said that that's not accurate and that doesn't work. Can you tell us anything about that?
Only it were that simple.
Yeah.
So GABA is made throughout your entire body. As probably a lot of your listeners know, you have about a third as many neurons outside of your brain as you do inside of your brain. So you have this gut brain that produces a bunch of the same neurochemicals and has the same effect on the physiology. So your GABA produced in your gut brain is still saturating your peripheral nervous system, and it's giving some feedback back to the brain. So GABA in your bloodstream does help, but GABA is too big of a molecule, and it's too polar, so it can't go through the blood-brain barrier. So I mean, everything can go to some extent, and probably with the SEALs I had even better success because they all probably had damaged blood-brain barriers from blast injuries. But it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier very well, but it will kind of relax you from the neck down really well. And it will get across the blood-brain barrier to some degree. And so, there's no single ingredient that's going to do everything. But if you think about what happens when the sunlight goes down, again, it's only blue light. That's the only light that matters in triggering this response. And so when the blue light goes away, it triggers this response. It ultimately leads to melatonin being released, and melatonin, like I said, changes a bunch of neurophysiology. And one of the things that it does is increase GABA. Well, melatonin has to come from somewhere. You have to make melatonin. So you have to make sure that your brain is making enough melatonin. And most people have heard of, or know of, or think about, or have experienced the Thanksgiving Day tryptophan. Everybody knows the tryptophan coma, right? You eat turkey and you take a nap on the couch. Not because turkey has super high levels of tryptophan. It, like meat has tryptophan in it. It's amino acid, and meat's protein. So there's a lot of tryptophan in meat. But just most people don't eat a pound of steak. They'll eat a pound of turkey, though, right? So it's like it's the meat we overeat. So we have this phenomenon. But tryptophan becomes 5-hydroxytryptophan. And then with the help of vitamin D3 and magnesium, 5-hydroxytryptophan can become serotonin, and then serotonin becomes melatonin. And this whole pathway needs to be supported. So if you, the other thing is so melatonin is a hormone, right? And if you just take melatonin, you do the same thing with the receptors. You take 5 milligrams of melatonin, or even a milligram of melatonin, that's way more melatonin than your brain would ordinarily see. So you get a downregulation of receptors. So when you do supplementation, you need to be smart about it. You need to think about all these pathways, which is why, like when I was working with the SEALs, I did all of that. I gave them tryptophan, I gave them 5-hydroxytryptophan, I gave them magnesium, I gave them vitamin D3, I gave them a very small amount of melatonin, I gave them GABA. And all of that stuff's important. And then you can add in things like phosphatidylserine, which decreases stress hormone, decreases cortisol. So but it has to be a holistic approach. You're not going to be able to just get rid of a sleep drug by replacing it with one supplement, one amino acid or something. Like you could do one supplement, something like my supplement that has all of those things in it, but you can't just simply go, oh, it's vitamin. And when I was working with the SEALs, I was like, that was the beginning kind of the whole vitamin D3 thing and how important that was. And it was known to affect sleep. I'm like, oh, I test all my guys, they're all vitamin D3 deficient. That's it. I'm the smartest guy ever. And like, that was part of it. That was like 10% of it, and it helped, but it wasn't the solution.
Gotcha. So I guess, we've been chatting about this for a little bit here, and I don't want to keep you all day, but out of all of the things that you want to get out there in the world revolving around sleep, what is the most important thing that you think people need to know?
Well, so when I first started lecturing, I built all my lectures around what are called 4 pillars of health: sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation. Like controlling the stress, like you can call it mindfulness, you can call it whatever you want. But we all know what that component is, right? That's community, that's meditation, it's religion, it's breath work, it's whatever kind of grounds you. And over time, I changed that. And I said, it's 3 pillars, and then the foundation of sleep. And sleep is what all the pillars sit on. You cannot diet and exercise your way to health when you aren't sleeping well. It's just not possible. As we already alluded to, if you aren't sleeping well, you can't even really exercise, right? You can't exercise for performance. You can be active, right? And if you aren't sleeping well, your nutrition is marginally important, because not sleeping well damages your gut biome, it damages fuel partitioning, it damages insulin sensitivity. Like everything gets so damaged, it doesn't really matter if you're eating a perfect diet. It's not going to be perfect to your body, because your body can't accept a perfect diet, because it's not functioning that well yet. And be calm and be to do all of the stress relieving things gets harder and harder the more stress you have. And if you don't sleep well, what's the first thing that happens? Increased stress hormones. So it is the foundation. There's nothing that will break you faster. There's a reason that we use sleep deprivation as an interrogation tool, right? There's a reason the CIA uses that. There's a reason they get mad at people at Gitmo for torturing people. And how are they torturing them? They're keeping them awake. Yeah, they're waterboarding them too, but they're keeping them awake, because that was the mother's load. Like that was the big stressor. Like nothing breaks you faster than that. And I think that's why when we first started this out, you started talking about special forces. That's one of the reasons we do that, special forces. It's the reason we go through a week without sleep as SEAL training, to see if you're going to break, to see how resilient you are. Almost every psychiatric illness, every psychiatric break starts with sleep deprivation. If you're going to have cognitive, emotional problems, sleep deprivation is going to make it worse. So nothing will improve your performance better than sleeping well, and nothing will break you faster than not sleeping well. And that's the most important lesson. That's the most important thing I have to share with people. And if you don't believe me, like I said, go to PubMed, go to Google Scholar, put in the word sleep, put in and anything else you care about, and just read to your heart's content. There's research out there to support that everything you value gets worse when you don't sleep well.
I love all of that. And I love what you said there also. Totally awesome. If my listeners want to find you, how do they go about doing that so that they can learn more about what you're doing and what you have out there?
So it's doc, as in short for doctor, DOC, and then just like the herb, parsley, docparsley.com. I have a lot of lectures on there, a lot of podcasts, a lot of blogs, lots of information. My sleep supplements on there if anybody's interested in that. There's PDFs you can download for helping you sleep with stress. There's PDFs to help you get your kids to sleep. There's like kind of all that stuff. So that's the one resource I just send everybody to, and they can branch out from there.
I love it. Well, I will stick that in the show notes. I certainly appreciate you spending some time with me today and chatting all about sleep. I think it's a really super important subject, and I'm really appreciative that you spent some time with me today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Like I said, if I don't have a soapbox to yell from, it doesn't matter. Like I can know everything in the world. It doesn't help if I can't share it with people. So I appreciate you having me on. It really makes the difference to me to be able to have opportunities to speak to other people's audiences. So thank you.
I love that. That's exactly why I started this podcast, to get things out there, because it's not easy.
It's not.
Well,
we all live in echo chambers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.